How can we reach the lost? How can we reach the lost? Well, the first way is through our lifestyle. Through our lifestyle, we can reach the lost. It says this in 2 Corinthians 2:15. As far as God is concerned, there is a sweet, wholesome fragrance in our lives. It is the fragrance of Christ within us, an aroma to both the saved and the unsaved all around us. It starts with who we are. It starts with the type of life that we live. The first way we can reach the lost is through our lifestyle. That doesn't sound too hard. That doesn't sound too complicated. But I want you guys to think about this. Think about this. Think about how each and every one of us has a message that we share. When someone looks at us, they can read who we are. We don't even really have to say much, but we have a message on the inside of us that we share. In the Bible, it says in 1 Thessalonians, it says this, check this out. It says, the word has gotten out. Your lives are echoing the Master's word. Not only in the province, but all over the place. The news of your faith in God, it's out. We don't even have to say anything anymore. You're the message. So think about this. When you go to school, when it's a school year, or when you see your friends over the summer, without even saying anything, you give off a message. So I want you to think about this. I want you to think about, okay, say we went to your school, and say we saw just some people in your hallway, we saw people in your cafeteria, and we reached in like a bag, and we pulled out like a picture of you. And it was a nice frame, and it had this really good-looking guy or really good-looking girl, and that's you. You're on there. And even if these people don't really know who you are, or even if they're like your best friend, what if we showed them that picture of you? And we said, what I want you to do, I want you to tell us what you think this person's all about. If we showed a person a picture of you, what would they say? Another way that we reach the lost is through our testimony. Through our testimony. Some of you are like, what? Testimony? Isn't that like just like a word people talk about like in Sunday morning church? We don't really talk about that here. But we all, if we're followers of Jesus, have a testimony. We are a story. And through our testimony, people can be saved. I remember this. This is a little bit about my story. I remember I was raised in church. But I remember the exact moment in time when something clicked in my life about God. I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember it so well. I remember growing up as just like a tiny tot. You know, I remember praying with my mom, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I remember that moment. But I remember the summer before I was in the 5th grade. I was probably like 8 or 9. I remember that moment, the summer before I was in the 5th grade. I went to church youth camp. I went to a church camp over the summer. And I remember being raised in church, but just not really understanding anything. I remember being in that service, and the guy preaching to all of us youngsters and everything, I remember him talking about God and talking about heaven and hell. And I remember him talking about Jesus coming into the world so that we wouldn't have to die and go to hell, but that we could spend eternity with God. And I don't know, but I was one 8-year-old who wanted nothing to do with hell. It scared me to death. I had nightmares. Fear came all over me. But I remember that night at that youth camp when it clicked in my mind that God loves me. God sent his only son into the world to save everybody. And that's my story. And you see, no one can tell me that didn't happen. No one can say that summer before you were in the 5th grade, you didn't go to church camp and you didn't sit in the old hot tabernacle and listen to the man preach and decide to make a change in life. No one can tell me that didn't happen because I remember. That's my story. It's been etched so deep down in my heart. And when you think about it, if you're a follower of Christ, you have a story too. We all have a story. And in order to reach the lost, we've got to share our story. There's a Bible story that I want to talk about really quick. And it comes in the book of John. And this actually is one of my most favorite stories ever in the whole entire Bible. And the Bible is massive. Who's ever seen a Bible before? They really are massive. I'm not kidding. It's like a fun read. But there's a story in the Bible, and it's one of my favorite. In John, Jesus and his disciples are walking down this road, and Jesus is a pretty popular guy. I don't know if you know this or not, but he was like God. So he was pretty popular. So Jesus is walking along, and all of his disciples, and off a ways off, there's this blind dude who'd been blind since he was born. And he's blind, and I've never been blind, but you can't see when you're blind. You can only hear. And so he heard that Jesus was walking by. And so he was like sitting down, and he's like, Jesus, please heal me. And Jesus and the disciples are walking, they're talking. They actually start talking about this blind guy for a second. He's like, Jesus, I can't see, heal me. And so he catches Jesus' attention, and Jesus walks over to him. And the guy's like, I want you to heal me, Jesus. Because Jesus is like God. He does it for a living, you know? And so Jesus does something pretty crazy. Not only does he heal this guy, but there's a story involved. You see, there was a lot of people around Jesus, and he had healed a lot of people by this time. But in order for Jesus to heal this person, this is what Jesus does. Jesus walks over to the ground. He spits on the ground and makes some little mud pies. And he takes these mud pies, and he walks up to this guy, and he's like, here, take this mud pie, bro. Right on your eyes, right on your eyeballs. Loogie pie. Right there. Jesus loogied on the ground and made some mud pie with the dirt. Like, it was a massive loogie. It was like the kind where you're like hawking so much, you grab like a big old marshmallow type thing out of your throat into your mouth. We're talking about Jesus. He can loogie pretty good, I bet. So Jesus is like hawking a loogie all over the ground and like wipes it on this joker's face. And people are probably like, wait a minute, Jesus. People normally don't like to be loogied on. I've never been loogied on, and I never really want to be. That's just pretty gross. But Jesus does something out of the ordinary. And he loogies on the ground, a massive hawker, and he makes a mud pie, puts it on the guy's eyes, and says, okay, blind man. I bet he talked to him like that. He said, blind man. I can just imagine that. Loogied on your face, blind man, go over here, and I want you to wash yourself, and then you're going to be able to see. So the guy does what Jesus says. He goes where Jesus told him to go and washes himself, and he can see. Holy moly. That's pretty amazing, right? He was blind, but now he can see. Okay, so that's not even the story yet. I want you to check this out. So the blind man, he just now can see, so he's probably like, oh my gosh, I can see. And people come up like, hey, weren't you blind? And he's like, yeah, but I can see now. And so people start questioning him. And Jesus became so popular, there were those who were jealous of him. Some people like in authority. Maybe like the Pharisees. You may have heard that word before. But like they didn't like Jesus. And so they wanted to find fault in Jesus. So they went to this formerly once blind man who had been loogied upon. And they said, listen, how is it that you see now? And he's like, this dude healed me. He spit upon me and healed me. Now, I don't have that sort of miraculous spit, but Jesus obviously does. So he's like, he healed me. And so they start questioning the man and start falsely accusing Jesus because they don't like him. They're like, you let this man heal you. This man is terrible. He's not God like he says he is. He's even a sinner. And they begin to just badger this man. They get this man's parents involved because they want to find fault in the story. And they're like, was this your son? And they're like, yeah. Was he blind? And they're like, well, yeah, he was blind, but he can see. So they go back to the man again, and they're like, tell us your story one more time. And he said, no, I've told you once. But check out what he says. When they question him again about who this Jesus really is, he answers and says, I don't know this man. I don't know if he's a sinner. But one thing I do know is that I once was blind, but now I can see. You see, that's that man's story. He didn't know everything. But the only thing he did know is that he was blind, but now he could see. And you see, no one could take that away from him. No one could say you weren't blind because he was blind. But now he could see. And see, that's some of us now. We all have this story. We all can literally say, maybe not physically that we were blind, but we've all been blind at one moment. And then when Jesus came into our life, we can see. And that's our story. And so why don't we tell people that? Why don't we let others know our story? Because sometimes maybe our story may be the last chance they have on coming to know Christ. Because I want you guys to know that nobody's promised tomorrow. Nobody's promised all of today. So we've got to do whatever we can to tell them our story. The next way we can reach the lost is through our invitation.